I've talked about defining custom script modules for Polybar, I've talked about defining custom IPC modules for Polybar, and today I'm going to talk about the general configuration of Polybar. So if you're new to this channel, remember to subscribe and ding the little bell icon down below because it'll really help the channel out. I'm aiming for 1,000 subs and any help would be really appreciated. So now that's out of the way, let's get started. Good morning everyone, and welcome back to the channel. So for anything that I don't have defined within my Polybar configs, I'm going to be jumping to the GitHub page for that and then just going through it there. Most of the stuff that I do actually have, but there's a couple of things that I decided to actually leave out. So I'll jump over to my desktop and I'll show you what my config looks like. So I had someone complain about the font size because they were watching on a tablet. So if this is still not big enough, let me know and I'll see what I can do about it. So I'll jump into my config. I don't know what's happened to my syntax highlighting. Normally this would be colored properly, but I guess we can just work with it as it is. It's not a big deal really. Okay, so the first things that we have in here are defining the colors. So a lot of the time with Polybar, what you're going to want to do is have the same or a similar subset of colors between your different modules. For example, like up here, all of my modules have a blue underline and this same gray background and also the same white font. So a good idea, instead of having to manually write out the color for each of those, and then if you feel like changing it at some point, having to jump through all of those and changing them manually, is to just define them within a variable. And this is very simple. So you just give it the name within this colors tag. So square bracket and then colors spelled like this. Not the proper spelling of colors, it's the American spelling, but anyway, I've dealt with that years ago. So what you do is the name of the variable, so these can be anything, they don't have to be what I have in here, but I've just got these ones here, so I've got like my background color, my background WM color. So if we take, for example, primary, that is defined as the hex value #3C71EA. I think that's a blue of some description, I don't remember. Yeah, no, that would be. I think that's the underline color here. Maybe it's something else. That's not too important though. And we've got my foreground color in here, which has this weird syntax. So this isn't a hex value. What this is doing is actually reading from my XRDB file. So the way you do that, so if you don't know what that is, that comes from your XResources file. So if we go into my XResources, a lot of terminals, what they'll do is they will read from, I have syntax highlighting in here, okay, whatever. A lot of terminals will read from this file to get their colors. So this XRDB foreground is this foreground color right here, so D8, DEE9. And you can use this syntax for other things besides reading from your XRDB file. You can also use it to read environment variables. So I'll show you what that looks like. So this is right at the top here. Yeah, it's right here. So it's just this syntax here. So if you want to reference a value in another section, you put the name of the section, .key, but the one you're most likely going to be using is this one right here. So this XRDB, the name of the key, and then the value. You can also give it a fallback. I don't typically use fallbacks. It's probably a better idea to use it, but right here is an example of what I was showing you just before. So if you want to load the color in, and then you can give it a fallback value if for whatever reason that color isn't defined. So in this case, they've given it the fallback of #00FF00, which is a gray of some description, I believe. Don't quote me on that though. But for referencing environment variables, which you're going to be using when you want to do things like reference a monitor or maybe reference a terminal that you've got defined in your environment variable file, you can do it through this syntax. The other option with things like that is to just use the normal environment variable syntax. So grabbing it like so. Say for my terminal, I could reference my terminal like that. But if you want to use it with the methods defined in Polybar, you can do that. But if you do want to reference your XResources file, then you're going to have to use this syntax. So this is just defining colors. Nothing too interesting here, so we'll jump on to the next section. So this is defining my bar. This is the main thing that you're going to be looking at for the most part. So the first thing we have in here is the monitor. This defines which monitor my Polybar actually appears on. If you leave this blank, it'll try to guess which your main monitor is. Typically, it works perfectly fine. I've always had it appear on my laptop screen, but if you're ever worried about it, you're better off defining it in here. But within your launch script, there is also a way to define which monitor you want to appear on. I'm going to save that for when I do a video on having multiple polybars running, and I'm going to talk about like the problems with doing that as well. So if for whatever reason that monitor can't be found, like say instead of using my laptop screen, I was to use my external screen, I can also set a fallback monitor. So what that'll do is in case this monitor can't be found for whatever reason, like it's unplugged, then it will use that monitor instead. So for monitor-strict here, what this does is sometimes Xrandr will incorrectly say that a monitor isn't available, and this basically just ignores that restriction and will try to put a polybar on that monitor even if it does say it's disconnected. I'm not sure how that would function if I did use it with my external monitor, but you might want to try that out for yourself. Monitor exact. I can't remember exactly what that one did. Haha, funny, because I said exact. That was a bad joke. So this uses fuzzy finding for monitors. Only ignores dashes. Useful when monitors are named differently with different drivers. Right, okay, so I don't exactly know what that does. I haven't run into any issues with my monitor names, so you might want to play around with that. If you have a problem detecting your monitors, maybe switch that between true or false and see what actually happens. Override redirect, that's another one I'm not sure about. Right, so this polybar up here is defined as another window, and override redirect will basically say, if you set it to true, it'll tell your window manager not to treat it as an actual window, and that'll basically just mean that it won't try to stop putting windows over it, so you just need to define a actual gap for it within your window manager configuration. With BSPM, that's very easy to do. I can't remember how you do it with i3 though, so for that you might be better off just leaving it as false and just letting your window manager handle it as a window. WM restack is a very, very useful feature to have in your bar, because what this will do, so I can't remember who told me about this, but I was running into an issue where my polybar was appearing over my MPV windows. So basically what ended up happening, I'll just actually show you. So if we bring up just my video folder, and I'll just load up something. So what you can see now is my polybar isn't visible, but if I was to set this back to, actually if I just get rid of that line, then I reload my polybar, what's going to happen is you're going to see the polybar is over the video. So basically what this does is it'll say, when you have a full screen window, just put the polybar behind it. This works with i3 and BSPWM. I don't think it'll work with any other window managers, at least at this stage, but I'm sure that if you want that feature there, you can probably request it from the devs, and if it's popular enough, they'll probably get it done at some point. Enable IPC is another really useful one. So I did a video on how to use IPC modules, and this is entirely essential to using IPC. So if this is set to false, you won't be able to do things like, if you look at the top of my screen right now with my backlight, if I change that value, it changes as soon as I change it. That is being controlled by IPC, so inter-process communication. Without that enabled, you can't do that, so that is entirely essential to that. Fixed center has to do with using modules that are laid out in your center. I don't actually have any center modules, but what that will do is will basically say, if you have center modules, the center of the screen is the center of the screen. Whatever modules are on the left and the right that are pushing out of the way, ignore those. Just sit in the center of the screen. So maybe you want something like that. I don't use center modules, so I can't say whether that's a desirable feature or not, so that'll be up to you. Bottom equals false is obviously what you would expect. So since it's set to false, if we set it to true, what you'll see is my polybar now appears on the bottom of the screen. I know I still have this gap up here. That's just a BSPWM thing. I've got a margin set at the top there, but ignore that for now. This will just put the bar on the bottom of the screen. I used to like bars on the bottom. When I was using i3, I liked the i3 blocks bar on the bottom. I don't know, I feel like it just looks better at the top now with polybar. I don't know what it is about polybar. But speaking of i3 blocks, if you really miss i3 blocks that much, you can actually you can add the separator that you're using with i3 blocks. So setting this value to a pipe, that'll give you a pipe between each of your modules. Obviously with my font, it looks a little weird because I'm using a monospace font, so it's just placing it strangely. But if you want a separator, I don't really see the point of it with this, especially because of the way that I have my module set up. If you notice, each of my modules have this slightly lighter gray background, so that's kind of my separator between them. And then there's like the rest of the background bar between them. And I don't know, I kind of prefer this method than what I had before. Now this dim value, I did want to talk about this, but I tested it. I have literally zero idea what it does. So I'll read out what it does to you. So where is it? dim value. Where is it? There. The opacity value between 0 and 1 used on fade in and fade out. So I presume that has to do when you do things like hide and show your polybar, but when I was using it, it didn't seem to make a difference. So maybe it does something, maybe it doesn't. I have no idea. If you want to test it out for yourself, go right ahead, see what it does. I don't know what it does though. So the next couple of things are fairly obvious. So this width will define the width of the bar. Typically, you're going to want to have this set to 100% unless you have some fancy method where you have like a bar over here and a bar over here, and you want to do some fancy stuff like that. Personally, I just like my bar to cover the entire screen. So if you notice now, then there's a bit of a gap here. Height is also going to do exactly what you expect height to do. You can define this as a percentage as well, but I prefer to have it as a pixel height. So with this, it won't actually do any checks to make sure that your font's going to fit. So if you set this lower than the size of your font, Polybar's not going to care. So if we set this to 10, you'll see what I mean. It'll happily cut the font off if you set it to a size that's too small. So make sure you give yourself enough room. You're going to have to test this value for yourself. It'll depend on your font size, your font, and a couple other things. So I can't tell you exactly what value is the best for you. You're going to have to work that out for yourself. The offset will basically just define how far to the left and right and up and down it is from the position on the screen. So if I've got this set at the top and I set the Y offset to, let's say, -10. What that will do, you'll see, is it'll basically just move the bar up. So this point up here is defined as x0, y0. If you move it -y, it'll move up. If you move it -x, it'll move to the left, or that's your left, I guess. My left is whatever. Cameras are confusing. I don't like having an offset value, but I've seen some cool stuff done where people have two bars running on the same screen and they have like a gap between them and they give it a bit of an offset, and just go look at Reddit or something. You'll find some cool stuff for it. Now this radius is another cool one. So I don't particularly like radius, but what it will do is it'll basically add a rounding to the edge of your polybar. But there is a slight issue with this, and I don't know if there's an issue about this or if this is an intended feature. If you have a tray, then it doesn't round the tray. So that's a major issue. So if you do want to have rounding, then you're going to have to go down to your tray settings, and I'll show you this in a moment, and then just set your tray to none, and that'll just hide the tray, and now you'll have rounding on there. It's not as clear because the background's dark, but there is a little bit of rounding there. Let's see, what else do we have in here? Oh, okay, so I didn't realize this until very recently, but you can actually set a gradient for your polybar. I don't know why you would do this. It looks awful, but maybe you like a gradient or something. I don't. I think it looks horrendous. I don't think there's any sequence of colors that I could have that would actually look good with a gradient on my polybar, but maybe you have some weird color setup that looks good. If you do, that's awesome. So that feature is there for you. So this is similar to how you would define hooks. So it's indexed from 0 and then goes up from there, but you don't have to do any other special stuff. You just have to index them and then it will work. But typically what you're going to do is just have one background color. So if you want to just have one, then you just define it with background like this. So if you want to reference those colors we defined earlier, you can use that variable syntax we used before, but instead of saying XRDB in here, you say colors instead. So colors is the name of this section. So colors dot the name of the variable. So I think you could actually define other sections besides colors. I don't think it needs to be called colors then. Maybe that was just in the default config and I just got a bit confused about that. Anyway, if you want to reference another section, you can use this syntax right here. So background and foreground colors do exactly what you expect, so I'm not going to waste too much extra time on those. Now the line size is the size of this line, but this color here isn't actually the color that the line is set to. This line color is a fallback color, so I'm not going to even bother showing you what that does because you can probably understand what a fallback color does. But if we set this line size a bit larger, you'll see that it just makes the lines bigger. So I don't know if you can, but you might be able to override those for each module. But I like them all being uniform, so hey, I like that. So the padding and the margin. So padding is the padding, actually, I'll just show you what it does. I'm terrible at explaining stuff. So padding dash left will go, and then we'll just give it a 20, for example. this adds a bit of a break between the edge of the modules and the start of the modules. So you can define padding like this, where you actually say a left and a right value, but if you want it to be the same for both, you can just define it as padding. For the module margin, this basically defines the gap between each of the modules. So if we set this to say 10, like we had for the padding just before, that just adds a big gap between those modules. The padding is for the edge of the bar. The margin is between the modules. If you remember that, then you'll probably be fine. So you're going to want to have backup fonts. So I think you can just define a font the same way you define background color, where you just define one of them. But I would highly suggest against doing that. So I've got 3 fonts defined. So we've got my main font, which is what these symbols up here are for the most part. The general letters are those fonts. Then we've got Hack Nerd font, which is just in case I have any powerline symbols that appear. And then these emojis are done through Noto Color Emoji. Now, with this font, there's a known issue. So if you want to actually change the size of it, so with normal fonts, you can use pixel size, but for some reason with this font, you have to use scale. I believe the scale is roughly sort of equivalent to pixel size anyway. So if we set this to like 20, you'll see that the emojis will get smaller for some reason. I don't know why they got smaller. Wait, give me 1 sec. We set that to 1. Okay, no, it isn't equivalent to pixel size at all. It just happened to be roughly similar at that size. So just play around with this if you want to use emojis in your bar. And I've got it set to scale 10, and my font size is set to 10, and those seem to be roughly the same. But if you're going to do something else, you're going to have to work it out for yourself. Now, you can actually set independent DPI values. I wouldn't recommend it unless you know exactly what you're doing with your fonts. Just let your fonts decide exactly what their DPIs are, and you'll be fine like that. Okay, so there's a couple things left, and then we'll be done. So in here, this is how you define what modules you want to use. So modules left will be where you define the modules you want to appear on your left side of the screen. So that is this BSPM one and my X window, which says the name of my current window. And then on the right, we have all of these. So besides these two, you also have modules-center. So much like for your bar, you have the similar stuff for your tray. So you have your padding, background, offset, and scale. Scale will basically just define the size of these symbols. So I've just got it set to 1, which is just the default size. But if we set this to 10, for example, then we'll see that it just completely breaks the scale of my bar, and you can't even see the symbols. Oh, it doesn't actually increase the size of the symbols. Okay, that was my bad. It just increases the size of the tray. So you're probably going to want to leave this set to 1. Otherwise, it's going to start looking a little weird. Now, we also have scroll up and scroll down. So when I scroll up, this will basically let me switch between my different modules. Obviously, you don't have to use this. I never use this myself. But if for some random reason I happen to be hovering over my bar and I want to be able to scroll, then I can do that to cycle between each of my windows. I think there's also an equivalent for i3, but I don't have this one. I think it's the exact same as this, but instead of BSPM-desk next, it's i3-desk next. But you have to check. I think it's in the default configs, so just, yeah, it should be in the default configs. And you can also, for the last thing, so there's a couple more things. Yeah, there's a couple more things. You can also define the cursors that appear. So if you've got scrolling set up, then it's going to give you a different cursor for most of the bar. So all of this bar I can scroll on. So I've just set that to the default cursor. And then for anything that I can click on, I've got that set to the pointer. So you're going to maybe want to use something else, but if we go over to the config, it'll tell us what we can actually use. So if we go over to cursor, yep, here. So it'll tell you the different cursors that are available. So much like with the background font and the foreground fonts, you can also define fallback click value. So if you remember from the script and the IPC video, I said that you can set up click events and things like that to appear on your bar. So if you want to set up fallback things, so whenever you click anywhere on your bar that has nothing defined, it'll do something, then you can do that in here. So there's a couple more last things. There's a couple of things about throttling the output. So I don't use any of this, but if for whatever reason you have a lot of modules updating at the same time, you can actually throttle how many of them get updated before it waits. I don't have that many updating, but if you have a ton, then you might want to look into doing this. And we have the fallback values for the formatting. I'm not sure about the compositing operators. You're going to have to look into that yourself. Go to this link, I guess. I'll leave that in the description down below if you want to actually look into it. But for the most part, the only thing you're going to really care about with the compositing is pseudo-transparency, so you can do things like radius. And also, you need to have pseudo-transparency to do the width, but maybe not. Maybe it's just for the radius. The last thing we have is just the global WM settings. So this will let you set a margin under the polybar and a margin above the polybar. So I reckon that is pretty much everything. I reckon we're roughly on 20 minutes right now, and that should be a good place to stop, I think. So yeah, that's all my settings. Screen change reload. There's just one more in there. I guess we can go over that one. I'm getting very tired, and I want to stop talking, basically. Where is it? Screen change reload. So reload upon receiving the XCB random screen change notify event. I don't know what that event is, but if that event happens, then it will reload if you have that set to true. Once again, you're going to have to test that for yourself if you have any reason to use that. I haven't noticed any reason I would need to look into something like that, so I haven't bothered setting it to true. Or have I? I have. I just don't use it for anything. Yeah, okay. I should probably look into what that does. Anyway, so I reckon that's a pretty comprehensive look at everything, so if I happen to miss anything, just leave me a comment down below and I will get to it at some point. So if you're new to this channel, remember to subscribe and ding the little bell icon down below because it'll really help the channel out. I'm aiming for 1,000 subs and any help be really appreciated. So up on that corner, I've got the playlist this video's in. Go check that out if you want to see other videos like this. I've done previous videos on Polybar IPC and Polybar scripts, and I think I have maybe one more Polybar video after this one to come out, and then I guess, I don't know what I'm going to do. Maybe some more BSP stuff, maybe some more SXHKD stuff. I don't know. Down below, I've got my library, so if you want to see my videos on a platform that isn't YouTube, go check that out. And also, I've got my Discord, so if you want to chat with me, I'm in there most days, so just send me a message in general or at me. I've also got my support links, so if you want to support the channel, go check that out. Obviously, you don't have to. All my videos will remain available for free. And down below, lastly, I've got my Twitter and my Mastodon. And I think that might be pretty much everything for me now, so I'm out.